If you're in your 50s or 60s and thinking about retirement, what I'm about to tell you will give you some, I think, very important perspective on this issue. A few years back, it was probably around 6 or 7 years ago, I came into a good chunk of money at work. They sold the company I worked for, and I was sort of at a high level position. So I made enough that I can actually take 2.5 years off to kind of test drive a little mini retirement. And what I found was that much of the prevailing wisdom about the benefits of retirement, they're actually not true. A lot of them are just fallacies. Here's the reality: is that work was never easy. Work was hard. It's hard. Whether you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 50s, or your 60s or 70s, work is tough, but work is good for you. And particularly as you age, if you're active in the workforce, it keeps you from, getting sort of worn out, feeble. It keeps you kind of strong. It helps keep you relevant. So right now, I'm going to go over what I think are the 5 main untruths about the benefits of retirement, and explain why staying in the workforce actually keeps you, mentally and physically fit, and even allows you more time, more quality time to do the things you want to do outside of work. Cultivate your relationships, do your hobbies, spend better and even more leisure time if you stay working. The number one fallacy about retirement is that when you hit your, say, mid-50s, your body starts to wear out, and you just don't have the stamina to make it through an entire workday anymore. I'm not going to lie. I think when you hit your 50s and certainly your 60s, you do get more tired, no question about it. But the solution is not to just stop working. Sit by the sidelines and give yourself more time just to sleep and rest. The only thing that's going to do is actually decrease your stamina even more. The solution is you got to take better care of yourself. You really got to focus on your health. You got to do all the things they've been saying your whole life, but you never really paid attention to. Certainly get regular sleep, exercise, good nutrition, stop with a lot of the sugar and really fatty meats and all that. But most important thing is, either stop completely or significantly reduce the amount of drinking. The drinking is the killer, especially as you get older. That's what wears you out. And if you do those things, your net energy level is going to be higher than it was in your younger years, because you're just taking better care of yourself, especially the drinking thing. If you eliminate drinking, you're going to feel better than you did 20 years earlier in terms of making it through the workday. The bottom line is, as you get older, you got to look out for number one. You got to take care of yourself and stop living for other people, including your employer. I think one thing I learned along the way was, your work will expand to the level that you allow it to. The more you work, the more work there is created. And nobody's going to thank you for giving up every minute of your life and devoting yourself to your job. And it's not to say that you shouldn't invest yourself in your work, but there's a limit to it. And especially as you get older and you need to make time for things like exercise and fitness, you can still do a great job and still have a life outside of work. So it just means put in a good day of work. But you got to unplug, and you can't worry about, doing every single thing that every person at your job is asking you to do or expecting you to do. You got to put down limits. And at the end of the day, you'll do just as good of a job. Nobody's going to notice. And you'll probably actually do a better job because you'll enjoy your work more. And I just think, when you're healthier, mentally and physically healthier, you have a better attitude about work. You'll probably be more appreciated by your employer anyway. There was a study done by Oregon State University in 2016, and it was published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. And it followed almost 3,000 Americans over an 18-year period. And the key finding was that people who worked for at least 1 year beyond the age of 65 actually had an 11% lower mortality risk. In other words, 11% lower risk of death. And the possible reasons they cited for this is, when you're working, you have, more daily purpose, you have more mental stimulation, more social interaction. The fact that with work you have more routine and structure to your days, and also, people who are working are just staying more physically active. There's always some physical component to working. So, to me, this is very compelling, actual data that shows that working longer actually makes you healthier and live longer. Now, they did cite a disclaimer and said that it could be just that healthier people just work longer. So they couldn't demonstrate necessarily a causal relationship, but there definitely was an association between working longer and living longer. So the number two fallacy about the benefits of retirement is that, when we get older, you just become less able to tolerate other people, especially at work. Little things bother you that didn't used to bother you. You feel more and more like the people you're surrounded by, I don't know, they're just, incompetent or lazy or just annoying. And they call this grumpy old man or grumpy old woman syndrome, and, it's this idea that, you become less tolerant and you feel like by the time you hit your, your late 50s or 60s, you've earned the right to just retire, leave all these annoying people behind you and, leave the workplace and just never have to deal with them again. But, if that's how you're feeling, I think you're thinking about it in the wrong way. I think the reality is, for most of us, other people were always kind of annoying, like it's just something you deal with in life, in the workplace and otherwise. But if we start buying into the narrative that, as we get older, it just gets harder and harder to tolerate other people, I think that's a choice you make. And you can choose to believe otherwise. You can choose to believe that that's how people are. We all think we're, more cool, more smarter, whatever, less annoying than other people. We always felt that way. And you don't get any less equipped to handle those people as you get older. Don't buy into that. You treat the annoying people as just part of the landscape. It's just one of the challenges of life, in work, in our relationships, in every aspect of our lives. You just deal with it. The answer isn't, throwing in the towel and quitting, retiring. That's just a quitter's attitude, And once you quit, you'll be sitting on the sidelines. There's no turning back. Once you get out of the workforce, you're kind of done. And then your presence in the world is just going to shrink. So instead, I say, stay strong, hang in there, keep working, keep contributing, fight back and just rise above it all, just like you always did, roll with the punches and, don't let the turkeys get you down. The third major fallacy about the benefits of retirement is, when you retire, you finally have the time to do the things you always wanted to do, but couldn't do because you were working. I say that's nonsense. That's ridiculous. Hopefully, in your life as you were working all those years, you made time for your kids, you had some time on the weekends for some hobbies, you worked out occasionally at least, you made time for spiritual matters. Speaking from my own experience, when I had that 2.5 years of my mini retirement, even the few things that I had to do or wanted to do didn't get done because I just had unlimited time on my hands. You kind of slow down, you kind of putz around, you put things off. It's like they say, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person. They're just more efficient. They get more done. Now that I'm working, I know for sure. I spend just as much time on personal matters, spending time with my wife, my kids, doing some of the gardening, some cooking, working out, as I did when I was not working. And maybe the most important point too is, if you stay in the workforce, the data shows, and I've already cited this, that you actually live longer. So you actually have more time. You'll have more years to do the things you really love to do. So, all this is compelling evidence to say, keep working. It's good for you, not just, financially, but also in terms of your health and to actually help you enjoy the things you want to enjoy in life. The fourth untruth about the benefits of retirement is that you've accumulated all of this wisdom over the years, all of this experience, and it's just not appreciated in the workforce. The people who are now in charge, they don't know what they're doing. They just bring in change for change's sake. Just everything's always moving, changing, moving fast. It's like chasing your tail. And you don't want to, waste the best years of your life learning all this new technology and new way of doing things, because all it really does is just make everything more complicated. So you feel like, you've earned the right to move on, to just put it all behind you, quit, and not have to deal with it. So here's the reality is that, even in your 50s or 60s or beyond, there's still a lot you need to learn. We all do. And the way things were done in the past aren't always the best way to do them. So, there is a value to hanging in there, staying relevant, staying, in the workforce, so you have opportunities to continue to learn and grow. Let me give you one example. The way it used to be, the sort of the prevailing attitude, the prevailing sort of wisdom in the workplace and elsewhere is, you take the time to do the best job you can. Take whatever time you need, but just make sure the product is like the best you can make it. And it was really all about quality, not quantity. Haste makes waste. That was the view. Well, at some point, somewhere along the way, that changed, particularly in the last 10 years. I mean, if you work in corporate America, you know exactly what I mean. There's just a premium placed on speed. Get it done fast. And you have to. You're just answering just massive number of emails a day, and you're working on so many issues. There's a lot about juggling, and everything's moving really quickly. And when I first realized that, and it was first presented to me, I was just like, man, this is insane. Like, who can do this? But I just said, all right, I've got to adapt to this in order to, continue to, achieve at my job, reach my goals and do my job. So I had to adapt. And now I see the merit to it, as far as doing things quickly. There is something to the law of diminishing returns, like the 80% of your time that you work on something is valuable. It creates, very good quality work product. But that last 20% of the increase in quality takes like 3 times as long, and it's not appreciated. It's not needed. It really doesn't help much. So, and I found that now I've gotten to work. I work a lot quicker. I still check emails. I don't like having typos, but I don't agonize over things that really don't matter as much. And that mindset helps me even in my personal life. Just stuff around the house, stuff I do. I don't agonize over the details. I don't worry about making something perfect. I've learned that over the years, that mindset, I've wasted a lot of time. So all that to say, this idea that, you know it all, things are just so bad in the workplace nowadays, you've earned your right to move on. I don't think that's a good attitude. I think it's more, continue hanging out, continue working, continue providing value, and learn and adapt and continue to roll and continue to grow. I think that's so important. So the fifth and last fallacy of the benefits of retiring is this idea that when people are on their deathbed, the most common regret is that they wish they hadn't worked so hard, wish they hadn't worked so much, that they spent more time with family and doing hobbies and the things that make you happy in life. Well, to me, that's just kind of a melodramatic cliche, something you'd see in a movie on like the Hallmark Channel. Because for me, the biggest regret, if I were on my deathbed, would be if I didn't fight the good fight, right until I took my last breath. And what that means is, working hard, contributing, pushing myself, continuing to learn and grow right until the final days. My dad, he had to go into a nursing home when he was 87 years old, and he was there for a few years before he passed. And during most of that time, up until the last few months, he worked. They had a program at the nursing home where the residents can work in the mailroom. They stuffed envelopes and put circulars together. And what I think the owners of the nursing home recognized is that, when people are working and participating and doing something productive, they're happier. And the social interactions he had with his coworkers were actually meaningful. And just that work, it made him more alert, I think healthier, and actually added to his longevity. I think that, as you get older, you do realize, the time left here on Earth gets shorter and shorter, and you want to make the most of those days. But I don't think that means necessarily that you then have to kind of sit around, a lot of R&R, take it slow, indulge in life's pleasures 24/7, just travel around. I think that's just chasing after an illusion. For me, what does it mean to make the most of your final years here on Earth? It's continuing to do what you were put on here to Earth to do, which is whatever God's plan is for your life, whatever your purpose here is on Earth, to do it right to the end. And that usually means, living a good life, working hard, being kind, loving, forgiving, being right with your Creator, and, keep going right till the end. So anyway, that's my thought for the day. If this video was helpful to you, if you enjoyed it or you got a benefit from it, please do hit the subscribe button. I would love to have you be part of my community, and we'll see you next time.